Let's talk about the Canadian dream of owning a home. But what if it isn't a dream? What if it's a video game? A huge online multiplayer game that by 2026 starts to feel completely and totally rigged. You know, the kind where the rules change right in the middle of a quest, the developers feel like they're actively working against you, and for literally hundreds of thousands of people, the final boss is just trying not to get kicked off the server. And look, this isn't just some clever metaphor. This is the real, raw feeling coming from people on the front lines. It's that gut punch feeling when you've done everything right. You've put in the hours, you've grinded for the gear, only to realize the game was basically designed for you to fail from the start. That's the core of what we're digging into today. So let's get into the first big problem. If you're a gamer, you know the dread of waking up to patch notes that just completely wreck your favorite character. Well, for anyone who bought a house back in 2021, the 2026 renewal cycle is shaping up to be exactly that. It's a massive targeted nerf. It's like a developer patch that punishes you for being a loyal player and just cranks the difficulty up to impossible. 1.2 million. Let that number sink in for a second. That's how many players are about to slam headfirst into what we're calling the Renewal Wall. These are all the people who logged into the game back in 2021, during that, ultra-low rate meta. Everyone was locking in mortgages at a crazy cheap 1.5%. But now, that 5-year contract is up, and the subscription price to stay in the game, it's about to go through the roof. And this table right here, this breaks down exactly how the developers changed the rules of the game. So back in 2021, you had this awesome setup. A super low contract rate plus a stress test at 5.25% that acted like a safety net. Fast forward to 2026, and that rate has more than doubled. And the worst part, that stress test, that safety net, it's just gone when you renew. The result is a massive debuff to your money, your real-world disposable income. For the players who are hit the hardest, we're not just talking about a debuff. This is a potential game over screen. For about 10% of these borrowers, that's something like 120,000 families, their payments are on track to jump by over 40%. Now, that's not just a price increase. That's what you'd call a catastrophic event, the kind of one-hit kill the game was never supposed to have. Okay, so what happens when the game developers nerf your character so badly you can barely play? Well, you don't quit. You enter the grind, a really painful, desperate survival mode where your only goal is just don't die, don't get wiped out. This is what we're calling the zombie grinder. So here's how the game's wipeout mechanic actually works. You see, the higher payments, that's just the first hit. It's bad, but it rarely takes you out on its own. The real killer, the thing you have to watch out for, is the combo, the double trigger. That's when that first payment shock lands a critical hit at the exact same moment a second shock hits you. Losing your job. And right here, we're seeing that second hit, that second trigger, start to activate. And it's happening in the game's main hub, its biggest city. Toronto's unemployment rate is now hitting 8%, way higher than the national average. This is ground zero, where the highest number of players with the most debt are suddenly open to that devastating 1-2 punch. And the results of that double trigger combo? 112%. That's the year-over-year spike in power of sale listings in the Greater Toronto area. This is basically the in-game equivalent of being forced to sell your absolute best gear to a vendor just to afford a single health potion. It's a forced liquidation just to stay alive. You know, this whole crisis is creating a brand new class of player, the zombie homeowner. Now, these people haven't lost the game, not yet. They still have the house, their main achievement. But they've had to sacrifice everything else to keep it. They have no financial health left, basically just draining their own life bar every month to make that mortgage payment. And here is the truly tragic part, the most ironic twist in the game design. To survive this horrible grind, players are draining their credit score. Think of it as their financial health points, their HP. The average score in Toronto has now dropped to 696. That's way below the 762 you need to get the best rates. So the very act of trying to survive is locking them out of the power-ups, the better interest rates that can actually save them. So this forces players to make a really desperate move. When you're facing a total wipeout, what do? Well, many are choosing what you could call a controlled demolition of their finances. Get this, 80% of insolvencies right now are consumer proposals. That's a legal move where you basically agree to nuke your own credit score, take that massive hit, just so you can protect your primary asset, the house. But hang on, While all the players are out there grinding, bleeding out their financial HP, sacrificing everything, what about the game's final boss? You know, the financial system itself? Well, as it turns out, the raid boss is doing just fine. Actually, it's getting stronger. $7.94 billion. That's the all-time high for impaired mortgages in Canada, mortgages that are in trouble. In terms of pure dollars, the damage to the player base has literally never been worse. It's a huge number, and it really shows you the scale of the pain that households are feeling. But here's where it all feels so rigged. While the players are taking all this damage, the banks have basically activated a defensive buff. They've put aside billions of dollars in what's called provisions for credit losses. It's a shield to absorb all the damage. But at the exact same time, they're raising their dividends. They are actually getting stronger and rewarding their shareholders while the game gets harder for everyone else. So when the game is this broken, right, the raid boss feels unbeatable. The grind is just killing you. What's left to do? Do you just rage quit? Well, faced with that game over screen, a lot of players are discovering a whole new strategy. It's not about trying to win an unfair fight anymore. It's about changing the game entirely. Just look at this map. Think of it like a server status screen. See how Toronto and Ontario are just glowing red? These are the hardcore servers. Delinquency rates are at 12-year highs. For a lot of people, the game is just unplayable here. The economic damage is too high, the odds are impossible. But now, look at the contrast. While those hardcore servers are on fire, check out the prairies. They're glowing green. These are like the player versus environment servers. They're not about fighting each other for scraps, they're about building. Housing starts are booming in places like Calgary and Edmonton. These are the servers where new content, new loot is actually being created. And this chart right here, this explains the why. This is the logic behind the whole migration. It's not just a feeling, it's simple math. For every one new home being built for players in Toronto, Calgary is building almost 5. If you're looking for new gear, new loot, where are you going to play? It's a no-brainer. You log out of the server with no resources and into the one where loot is dropping everywhere. And this is what that migration actually looks like for real people. This is the result of changing servers. For that 2021 group of homeowners, survival doesn't mean beating that impossible Toronto boss fight anymore. It looks like this. It looks like just resetting the whole quest and starting over on an easier difficulty setting somewhere like Edmonton. So what does this all mean for the Canadian housing game? Well, this huge shift, this massive server migration, has created a completely new meta, a whole new way the game is going to be played for years to come. And that's the final and most important takeaway here. The game's fundamental problems, the rigged mechanics, the unfair rules, the developers never actually fixed them. The players just found a workaround. They found a new place to play. So the big question we're left with is, what happens when the easy mode servers start to fill up and there's nowhere left to run?